You get the team you tolerate. You get the team you deserve.
You deserve.
If you get bad actors in your team, it will bring the others down. They see this and think, why does he allow that? They lose respect for you. James Schramko here. Welcome back to my podcast. This is episode 1093. Today we're going to be talking about dealing with difficult people. And in order to do that, I've brought along a special guest who's not a difficult person, I should say. Well, mostly not. Lloyd Thompson from virtualdoo.com. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me, James. Good to be here.
You get to deal with all sorts of people in your job as a fractional operator or someone who going in helping visionaries manage their team and their systems. And so you've got a vast array of characters. And certainly in my background, I can relate to this, having been a former debt collector and salesperson and then a coach, mentor. I've had all sorts of people, and occasionally, I don't know what the number is, maybe 1 in 100 people might be not as easy to deal with as everyone else. So,
oh wow, that would be a great statistic. Maybe my percentage is a bit higher than that. But well, okay.
There was some other statistic, and I don't mean to make light of this, but just on a serious note, I think there was something like about 30% of the population have some kind of mental illness or are challenged just in living. And what I do know is that often people will respond to their challenges, outwards, project. I think they call it projecting, like to other people. And you can see that probably no greater instance of that if you ever publish a YouTube video. People seem to comment. Basically, they're commenting their true thoughts and feelings. Like if you had a video about success and they spray you with something negative, it might be them projecting their dissatisfaction, with where they're at in life. So for me, one thing that I always keep in mind is that if people are being difficult, it may not necessarily be about you at all. And that was one little layer of shock absorption that always helped me a little bit. They might be just having a bad day. But I'm curious to find out your experiences with dealing with difficult people, Lloyd, and why did we decide on this topic?
Well, I'm talking about how I'm defining these difficult people. I guess I'm going to focus on sort of 3 kind of areas of someone who might be really task-focused and not so people-focused, and either they just don't have good capability to deal with people or they just don't care. Or similarly, like someone who can be social but chooses not to be social. Or some people are just damn right antisocial. And when I've been dealing with difficult or challenging people through my time, normally the thing that's served me well over the years is just to breathe into my belly, take 1 second to think about before I respond, and respond calmly and measured. And then that's worked for the most part for many years very well, until there was one point where I encountered who I'm going to refer to as the tank. And unfortunately for me, the tank was my new boss. And I remember sitting, and I can't remember what it was specifically that triggered me. I just remember how I felt about it. And I just remember my blood boiling. And after that meeting, I had to just take a walk around the block a couple of times to cool down before I was going to encounter another person. Like I'd never had my buttons pushed like that at work. I was really activated and really, really not feeling great. And I remember talking to one of my coworkers, and I said, "How on earth do you deal with this guy?" And he said, "Actually, there's this book, Dealing with People You Can't Stand. Look up the tank." And I'm like, right.
Dealing with the name of the tank. Stand.
Yeah. So I looked up the tank, and it was an eye-opener. I didn't know a book would so accurately define this person. And so then this became somewhat of a passion for me. I discovered other books over time. I've discovered courses of just how do you handle these challenging characters. And I mean, in more recent times, there's a couple, and all of these things really overlap. In more recent times, I read Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, and another fairly recent one, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And there's a lot of overlapping principles for all of these materials. But what I thought I would do today is talk about 6 classic avatars, including the tank, of who you're likely to encounter in work, other people's teams perhaps, or in life.
I love that. And also I love that you're reading books and actioning it. I've noticed a constant stream of books coming through your emails and on your socials. And I did ask you, do you actually read these? And you said, yes, I actually do. And I've taken to reading a book each weekend just to keep up to date. I'm not subscribing to this thing where, you know, the person who reads the most books is the smartest person or whatever. But I do think it's interesting to read a book with the lens of what will be the interesting things I can pick up or reflect upon from reading this book, and knowing that a book is generally someone's opinion and it's usually in a bubble or isolated. We don't have to take it as gospel, but it's fascinating when you do pick up themes across multiple sources. There has to be some truth in it for you that helps you have a new protocol or algorithm for dealing with things. And it sounds like you've picked up some handy types.
I love the fact that you've brought that up. I just want to go back to that. Do you read all those books? It's what you call, it's my infinite game. It's not work for me. I actually really enjoy it. And then I think, well, other people are going to appreciate the summaries of these books. And I spend a bit of care to just tailor why I read this book and the key finding, but it's not work. I can get through one every week or every 2 weeks, just thanks to Audible. So, yeah. So anyway, this is another thing, was inspired by material I got from books. And so, yeah.
Well, tell me about the tank then. Is that the first one?
The tank. So the tank is actually a character I do come across pretty often. Some business owners are tanks. And when I say a tank, they like this classic, I'd say East Coast America has a lot of tanks, that kind of like quite a dominating character, short, sharp communication, hot shots. Doesn't always mean they're aggressive, but they can be, and quite confrontational. So the first thing is that breathing technique's going to help everybody for nearly everything, just remain calm. And then the other thing, and this is an overlap of something I got from Never Split the Difference, is when the tank's communicating with you, to actively listen and play back, just so they know they're being heard. That can just calm them down a bit. But here was a general principle I picked up from that book I mentioned earlier, the Dealing with People You Can't Stand, which is a lot of people need to be communicated with in the way that they communicated with you. And I don't mean aggressive, but if their communication style is short, sharp, and quick, then having someone who's on a big meandering conversation and taking their time, that's not going to land well with them. So if they're coming at you short, sharp, and quick, then respond short, sharp, and quick. And that active listening piece can calm them down a bit as well. So that's how I've handled the team.
This is very critical. In nonviolent communication, by the way, it also preaches play back to someone what you're hearing. And it gives you specific techniques for that. Great book. I've experienced this too, and I agree with you. In debt collection and in selling and in customer service, they teach you stuff like if someone's aggressive or screaming at you on the phone, it's generally not effective to be calm and say, oh, please, sir, just calm down for a minute. You're better off to match their tone, and you can raise your volume and meet them where they're at. And I had a classic tank client. At Mercedes-Benz, I had a lot of these. I mean, obviously a lot of company directors and ball breakers and top dogs in industry, they're buying the top tier vehicle in the marketplace. And I still remember this one guy, Kevin. I won't say his surname or his business, but he used to come into my office and he would stand beside me, above me at my own desk, and demand pricing and availability of stuff. And I would just stand up, look him straight in the eye, and I'd say, you get over there and sit down in your chair, and then we'll start the conversation. Do it now.
Wow.
And he would go around and sit down, and I'd sit down, and then we'd get on with it. But if I don't meet him where he's at, he's just going to dominate me. And if he keeps going with it, I say, is this how you treat everybody? He's like, sorry? I said, is this how you deal with the people in your own office, your own staff? I bet they're petrified of you. You can't just walk around in life demanding stuff from people. They just fear you. They're not doing it because they respect you. If you want my respect, you'll earn it. So sit down, shut up, and let's talk about this vehicle. And they'd be like, they've never been spoken to like that. But they, you know what, Lloyd? They love it. They absolutely love it because they relate to it.
I work with quite a friendly tank recently. That's an odd one, isn't it? And he said to me very early on, it's like, if you're going to put an operator in here, he says, I know I will push. They need to push me around or I won't respect them. So let them know that. And he would come out like the tank, and then like an hour later, he would be all retrospective and thinking, I shouldn't have been like that and so forth. So he knew he was a tank, and he would arm you on how to deal with him.
This reminds me of General Patton, who was a genius at tank warfare, and he beat Rommel at tank warfare, and Rommel had written a book on tank warfare. And after he defeated Rommel, he holds up the book, which is Rommel's, How to Win Tank Warfare book, and he goes, Rommel, you fabulous bastard. It's like, the real lesson is, if you want to beat a tank, know how tanks work, and then you have the right strategy to deal with a tank.
Since we're on military-themed names, the next one I want to go to then is the sniper.
Oh, sounds good.
So the sniper, I've encountered snipers before when I'm giving a presentation or I'm doing meeting facilitation, and the sniper will make some little sniping, quick hot shot remark, and they're hoping you're going to carry on. The last thing a sniper wants is to have their location exposed. They don't actually want the attention fully on them. They're just hoping you're going to carry on. And I don't understand the psychology entirely of a sniper, why they want to score or land a point. But they take a shot and they hope you carry on. So the way to deal with a sniper is actually stop and just ask for clarification. So say, sorry, can you just replay that? Can you just explain your comment? Is there an underlying thing you want to bring out here? That is something they're not expecting. They don't want that attention brought onto them. And then you don't necessarily want to hold up a meeting like this, but you can then just say, look, actually, if there's an underlying issue here, let's you and I catch up afterwards and close this out.
So put the floodlights on, get them to stand up, take the ghillie off, put down the weapon.
And they will know next time they take a shot, they'll be exposed.
So that's like the non-violent one. So Lloyd, when you say that comment, you're expressing that you have concerns about the way we do this because it makes you feel like you're missing out, and that they have to say, well, oh, no, that's not what I mean. Or, yeah, actually, I do.
Yeah. Well, so let's go to the third one then.
Okay,
so
what's the third one?
I've run out of military names now. I'm going to go to the nothing person.
Well, that's run out of all names, isn't it?
The nothing person, handling a nothing person, it's a bit like trying to get blood out of a stone. Like you're interacting, you want feedback from people, you want interaction.
Call that the donkey.
Donkey. Is this your general pattern, not moving?
Yes, donkey on the bridge, just standing there blocking everything.
So the nothing person might not be very responsive, and how I handle them is ask them some open-ended questions and then patiently wait. And if you're a tank, by the way, that's just not going to work for you. Tanks just can't do that. But
I suppose that's the important thing is perhaps you could identify with one of these and understand how being that character might limit your ability to communicate with some other people.
Well, I will say on that, actually, with someone like the nothing person, you do want to seek to understand, like, why are they behaving like that? And that can be something, if it's outside the context of a meeting, you can have a chat with them and say, what's going on for you? Are you not comfortable in this environment? Perhaps it's maybe they're an introvert and putting their hand up and sharing their view is not something they're so comfortable with. And there are other ways for people who are introverted to be able to contribute to a big meeting. Like you might say, hey, I want everyone to share one idea from this, and it's either let's call it out in the meeting, or if it's on a virtual chat, just message it in the chat channel, or if you're in person, can you just bring a sticky note to the board so we've got all of our ideas captured? And that's a way to bring them in. So they might not actually be trying to be difficult in that case. So seek to understand. My
specific example is this: when I was running a website development team and I'd go and meet with the team, was a team of about 10 or 12, and one or two of them were so introverted and so shy that I noticed they were strategically moving into a different room of the place that we'd rented to be away from me, because they were just petrified of me. I was the big scary boss. And so that's like I had to work on being conscious of this behavior, so that normally they would escape attention from a regular person, but I was keenly aware they were never around. And I actually could see whenever I moved somewhere, they'd move to a different place to be away from me. And once I recognized that, I realized, so I'm dealing with an ultra introvert. And often people who are coders are attracted to just working behind a keyboard and not having to deal with the general public. So then I was able to identify things such as what you're talking about. It'd be easier to have a way for them to submit things in a non-attentive, non-confrontal way. Like I'd like them to send me one idea between now and the next meeting that we could float at the meeting, and I'm not necessarily going to identify who came up with the ideas or whatever, but we're just going to put them into the hat. And so you could draw them out in that regard. But yeah, there will be people like that, and they're the ones that are often not going to feel heard because you haven't given them any attention because they didn't warrant it through their non-action.
Mm. I think those people we're talking about who are introverted quite often really do think about what you're asking them to. They give a lot more thought than, say, an extrovert who's just going to, the minute they get a small idea, they're just going to shout it out. They haven't even thought it through, whereas an introvert quite often will really develop their idea and doesn't want to submit their idea until it's fully thought out because they're scared of that negative interaction with it. So yeah, submitting that, putting the thing in the hat or putting it on the board or putting it in text is a really good way to handle that.
Love it. What's the next type?
So the next character is the no person. I'm actually handling a no person in my personal life at the moment. I've got one of these on the executive committee of one of the apartments I own. And it's like a no person is a great destroyer of things. Like they're not going to accept things. They can obstruct momentum. They can be quite demoralizing. And I've seen folks like this in politics as well. Like they can be a great destroyer of other people's ideas and get popularity for that. But actually building something and creating something is not something they're so interested in doing. And that's just not where they are. And so how I've managed to get success with no people before is going back to that general principle of active listening again, so making sure that their opinion is felt heard and they've played it maximum. So you've really acknowledged their side and understood their thing. But the best thing that I've found is to build the solution together with them from the start. So perhaps there's something missing out there, like, hey, let's just understand what we're trying to do here. Can we involve you some more? Your opinion's valid. What else can we do? And that can be a way to handle a no person.
I had a no person boss who would reject anything, any idea. I remember we moved into a rented facility while we were building a dealership, and it had pink walls and water damage in the roof and mold starting. And he wouldn't even allow a contractor to come and repair it. He wouldn't allow us to paint the showroom. It was like no money for marketing. Just, it was like hands in pocket. They used to joke about this guy that he still had his pocket money from kindergarten. He was so tight. It was just anything you sent to his office for approval, it was like a black hole. It would never come out of it. Nothing would ever happen. It ended up working in my advantage because he wanted me to sign a new employment contract. And I noticed the new employment contract had some pretty drastic clauses in it that would not be in my favour to sign. So I used it back on him. I put it in my drawer, and he was too scared to ask me about it, to follow me up. And if he ever did, I would have told him that I'll be looking at it at some point and I'll get back to him. And I never signed it for the last, I think, about 18 months of my career. So sometimes they can relate to their own technique.
Maybe they're very good with their time, though. If they've been rejecting lots of people by saying no, then no one gets through, and they've been militant with their time and where they give it. Perhaps there's a benefit.
His time was spent, I think, at day bars with dancing girls and massages and things. So he used to come into work, make a coffee, come in about 9 or 10, have a coffee, walk around, have a look, and then disappear. And then we'd see him again at about 4, have a coffee, and then he'd go back home. What he did during the day was a complete mystery. But
he got you running things, so he had plenty of time. He was winning at that.
Lloyd, it was the greatest gift. I was obviously a very hardworking operator. I was having to. The ultimate was when we actually moved the dealership. We moved from 3 facilities into 1, and he went overseas on an 8-week holiday. So I remember standing there I'm there at like midnight with 3 or 4 buckets full of keys with no labels, trying to figure out what opens what. I'm dealing with all the contractors, all the removalists, all the suppliers. I had to do all the logistics, inform the customers. Like, it gave me the ultimate responsibility, and him saying no to everything or never responding to anything meant that I just took charge, and I grew the most in that role due to someone else's lack. I stepped up and I took this. It was like as if he pulled his hand out of a bucket of water. There was no gap left. I just took over. And so it was such a gift having that. So having some no people around you can let you see who steps in, who compensates. And sometimes those people are not really required in the whole equation. If they're not contributing, they may not be a place for them.
Yeah. Great insight, especially if you've managed to find a way to replace them in the business eventually.
What about the next type?
Yeah, so number 5 is the whiner. And the whiner is someone who complains frequently. Perhaps they feel overwhelmed. Perhaps they're seeking perfection. And I think that's often a negative thing, because that last 20% of effort to get there, to seek perfection, means they're often quite ineffective. And I must admit, I struggle with whiners. I don't have any on my team. I struggle. It's because I find it as laziness, that they're not coming to you with a solution. Like, they're just coming to you with a problem. And so the way that I handle whiners is, again, I go back to that principle of active listening. Okay, explain, okay, and acknowledge what they've said. And then I go to that coaching, so that 1-3-1. So, okay, what was the challenge? Okay, what were the options you came up with? And this is where we say 1, 2, 3. What was your 3 options you suggested? So coaching them into that 1-3-1 model. And one of those options might be do nothing. And then what's the one you suggest? So coaching them into coming up with a solution and working through those solutions with them.
One thing we do to combat this in the weekly mentor call is to share a win at the start. And I do that to create gratitude and for us to realize, as entrepreneurs, especially visionaries, we're constantly looking at what's missing, what's short. Someone else sold their business for more money. Someone else is making more profit. Someone else is this, you've still got this gap, or as Dan Sullivan talks about, the horizon. The win is like, well, what's actually gone well? Even if it's a personal one, it doesn't have to be business. And one thing I picked up from a strategic coach training probably almost a decade ago was one of the teachers I had was quite good. And he said he's got a rule in his household. If people want to complain, they have to say 3 things they're grateful for first.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, so you're allowed to complain, but say 3 things you're grateful for first. And I'm with you, Lloyd. If someone's constantly whining, they're not attractive to be around.
No.
It's like if everything that comes out of their mouth is telling you about what's wrong with something, I think that it goes back to the Charles Haanel material, like the mental chemistry. Your outside world is a reflection of your inside world. If everything that comes out of your mouth is a whinge, it means you're expressing that your outside world is dissatisfying and not happy. Then there's something going on in your inside world to cause that. And I would want to be listening carefully and addressing the root cause if possible. Again, from the non-violent, it might be saying, well, what I'm hearing is that the situation you're describing makes you feel unhappy. Tell me more about that. And then try and draw it out and see what's really going on.
I remember in corporate, I'd worked with a couple of whiners, and I was a contractor. And we would say, as a contractor, we'd have a little joke amongst us and say we'd call them a whinge of permies, like it's a collective noun, a whinge of permies and a wad of contractors, because we were quite happy to go from contract to contract, but they're going to stay there and put up with whatever they're unhappy about and then complain about it and do nothing. So
I confront whinges usually. I guess I did it to you in a way. You weren't whinging, but you were reflecting. Do you remember when we met and we were talking the surf? And I think you said to me, listen, I may not be around next week because I'll be in the office. And I said, oh, well, that's no good. Like, well, so what have they called you back? And you said, yeah, I've got to go back into the office now. This was during COVID.
Yeah.
And I said, well, are you looking forward to that? And you said, no, not really. And I said, well, why do you do it? And you said, well, what else would I do? So you were actually very good at solving your own problem. And then I said, well, what do you actually do? And then you told me what you actually do. And then I said, well, I think there's something you could do that wouldn't involve you going back to the office like ever again. And you said, tell me more. And then you've ended up with virtualdo.com. To tremendous success, I might add. It's like worked out beyond.
Well, you liberated me from corporate world. Thank you, James.
That's
began in the surf.
As I had done for myself many years prior. Like I know the path. It's not an easy path by any means, and there's lots of challenges along the way. But I am very good at helping people swing across the jungle from one vine to the other, and that involves letting go of a vine and grabbing a new one. I always encourage grabbing the new vine before letting go of the old one. But if you try and hold both, you end up stuck. And you had balls and courage and wisdom to be able to make that transition. Whilst you were reflecting out loud, you were able to put in a recovery mechanism of, well, what else would you ask the question? So I think for whiners, if you're listening to this and you think, gosh, maybe I might be a whiner, it's always worth asking that question. And I do this with myself. If I find myself having a whinge, and I am a bit of a mismatcher, Lloyd, I tend to be able to spot what's wrong with things. I'm very easily able to point out the flaws in other things, right? Probably in the past I was way worse at that as a behavior thing. But I do, if I catch myself thinking, I say, well, hang on, what's causing me to feel this way? What would make the situation better? What can I do proactively to get to a better situation? And then I actually kick in a self-reboot mode. And so that's a skill I think that not everyone's developed, but we can help them develop it.
I think that's the crux of it. For me, whining without action is laziness. And that's the bit that I can't relate to. If I'm going to whinge about something, it's because I'm trying to think what the action is that's frustrating me. Like, what's the action? Once I know what the action is or the decision is, great, I'm going to go with it. I'm going to get it done. But some people who are just whiners, they're not coming for action. They're just, they're just coming to whinge, and I can't relate to it very easily.
And I've had this before, and maybe you have too. People whinge and I tell them a solution. They whinge, I tell them a solution. They whinge, I tell them a solution. And no matter what I say will not satisfy them. And I realize that I'm actually enabling them to shortcut the thinking process. So I switch into Socratic mode instead. So instead of saying this is the solution, I say, well, what options do you have? And I move more to them starting to think through this themselves. So what are your options here? And that's also Chris Voss technique, is having them help you solve the problem. It's like the hostage negotiation. They're like, I want a plane with fuel and $100 bills. And you say to them, how am I supposed to do that?
Yeah.
Right? And you get them working on the problem. So this is the most important point. If you have a whiner, have them working on the problem and helping you solve it. It's not really you could die young, burning up energy trying to solve a whiner's challenges and they never get healed. So
I've got one more for you then, and I'll put this person in a category of their own, because I don't find this kind of character necessarily as toxic as the others, but it's a character that I come across quite often. It's the yes person. And the yes person over-agrees and quite often commits to things that they can't get done. And for me, I would prefer a no anytime rather than a yes who doesn't deliver. And so when I come across a yes person, I want to know, like, what's the underlying cause here? I come across a lot of yes people when I've worked with people in sort of lower cost remote locations, and it might come from a cultural thing where they have this picture of a boss and a boss can't be challenged. And so I remember when I worked in corporate before, I ended up running a large team, and when they started working for me as what they saw as their boss, I would challenge them with, I would say, all right, I'm going to test you here because you're agreeing with me all the time. And sometimes I'd throw out ridiculous ideas to see if they would agree. And sometimes it wasn't a test. Like, this is actually a ridiculous idea that I came up with. And so I had to train that out of them.
I had the same thing. The early contractors for my search engine optimization service, they would just say yes, and they would promise everything and then fail to deliver.
Mm.
And I'd question them, and then there'd be excuses or whatever, but they would always just say yes. And it'd infuriate me because I place a lot of value on integrity and delivering on promises. And I found culturally it just wasn't a thing. And so I switched to the Philippines, and I found that I had a much better, once you get your team aware of your expectations and create a safety net for them that they can't fail, they're okay to swing for the trapeze. And they'll actually say, I don't think that's going to be able to be done in that time, or this will probably take extra time, or we were hoping to have it done, but there has been an issue we've come across and we're going to need more time. And that is much more satisfying because you can set realistic expectations around that.
I mean, with the yes person, I just go into that coaching mode again. Like, okay, well, let's work through this together. What's going on for you? You know, now we've seen what's on your plate. Do you think this is really achievable? And
I'm just interested if you can train that out of a cultural thing. It's certainly taken me a while to develop my team to be fearless. And I proudly say that my team are much bolder than average for their culture, because we've created that high performance environment where it's okay. It's like, hey, we're going out to the racetrack, we're going to do some hot laps, but we might blow an engine, and that's totally within scope. So let's go. Let's see how hard we can rev this.
I like that point you've raised there. Like, you know, can you really train it out? Because I think this draws a line under all of it. So for me, I think if this is a client or a vendor of yours and you're working with them and it's not going to change, like, you can't change them and change the way you've been able to handle them. But if it's a client or a vendor, what's the opportunity cost of working with them? Is there a better option out there if you were to invest your time, not just for you, but with your team? They have to put up with this difficult client. Perhaps that's not for you. And then the second thing is, if it's your team, like, if you have these characters in your team and you've coached them and you've given them the feedback of what you've observed, then you're building a toxic culture that will rot your business from the inside. And it's, you know, you need to let those people go. If you've not made those changes, you need to let them go, because otherwise it will spread. And I've seen this before.
We have seen it. And you get the team you tolerate. You get the team you deserve.
You deserve.
If you get bad actors in your team, it will bring the others down. They see this and think, why does he allow that? They lose respect for you. Presumably you are able to go into businesses, diagnose and audit their entire team and systems as part of what you do in operations.
Yeah, I mean, in the month that we do our audit and we look at team and systems issues, we're certainly going to see a lot about the dynamic of how the team respond together and be in those meetings. And that's actually something I would recommend, is if you're a business where you're aware of some behavior and for whatever reason you're not going to take action on it. And I do see this a lot, particularly if it's a family member they've hired or a friend they started the business with, and there's some bad behavior there, or there's even some like underperformance and they're aware of, but they just don't want to make that move themselves for whatever reason. I see it, I actually understand it. And actually getting an outside person in to see if and validate if they're seeing the same thing. And it can also be them coming as the bad cop, as if you're like, they've come in, they're running this thing, they've done their audit, they're the person who observed whatever they observed, and now they're running things for a while, and they're going to make the changes that need to be made.
Yeah, and I think the bigger your business gets and the more people you have, the greater the cost of not doing this would be. So it's certainly well worth it. Lloyd, how do we get in contact with you?
Yeah, so you can just find me at my website, virtualdoo.com, or just email me, lloyd@virtualdoo.com.
Love it. Thank you, Lloyd. It's been a great chat about the different players. It's, as usual, it's brought back some fun memories for me of all the things that have happened for me to make me the experienced player that I am to this day. I've encountered all of those types. I've had various strategies to try and deal with them before, but it's also quite heartwarming to hear that other people have found these characters as well. And once you've identified the character and you know how to deal with it, it's just so much easier from that point. I hope this episode's been useful. We'll put up the show notes at 1093. That's 1093 on jamesschramko.com. And we'll have you back in a future episode on a new topic, Lloyd.
Great. Thanks for inviting me, James.
Thank you.
This is James Schramko.